Okay, so this morning we're talking to Phil Edholm. He's a guy that has 30 years of industry vision and leadership. He's one of the most entertaining guys in the space. He actually makes the communications world interesting. But he believes in things like transformation and convergence that are coming in and changing the way that business communications work fundamentally at its core. And so I'm just really excited that we get a chance to spend some time with Phil, kind of get his view on the world. And he's also known as sort of a disruptor. He just speaks his mind. And so for those reasons, I think we're going to have a lot of fun with Phil. So thank you for being here and spending some time with Mike and I.
Super. Appreciate the opportunity.
I think maybe where we kind of start right now is to talk a little bit about the disruption that's going on in telco. You've mentioned and used inflammatory words like VoIP-mageddon, and are we headed for a telephony meltdown and those kinds of things. And so I thought maybe we'd just spend a minute going there and see the world as you see it, what's causing you to react the way that you're reacting, and where do we go from here?
So I think it's a very interesting thing. So first off, before we even start, one of the really important things is to define your terms, because sometimes when you say something, people don't understand what you're saying. So I'm very pedantic about terms. When I talk telephony, I fundamentally am talking an audio-based system that has access to the full number dialing plan of the PSTN. That to me is telephony. That defines what telephony is. UC is the set of collaboration and communication functionality that is above telephony and is used today in communication by individuals. Okay. And then the last thing is application communication, or CPaaS, which is really adding communication and satiation driven by an application representing a business process. So if we think about those three terms as representing kind of three communication aspects, I think it allows us to talk more effectively. So clearly, the telephony world that existed in 1990 has changed dramatically, and it's because of convergence. I mean, if you stop and think about it, in the 1970s, when PBXs were developed, there was no convergence. They took some processors and some memory from the computer world at the time, and they built these completely independent systems. In fact, they even developed their own operating systems at one point. But over time, those were replaced by things that came out of the IT industry: standardized processors, standardized computers, standardized application units, dot. So that was the first stage of convergence. Then starting in 2000, we really began to converge on a single IP infrastructure. Starting in 2010, we really began to converge on personal productivity software, the thing that knowledge workers, that 25% of the workforce that work have independent work processes, the tools that they use in their individual business process, things like Outlook, began to be integrated with communications. What we're seeing now is the next, I would call it, level of integration, the next level of convergence, which is we're bringing communications right into the structure of applications. And so really what we're seeing in the industry now is nothing more than the result of the last 20 years of convergence, what I believe will be the next 10 years of convergence. And so what that says is that if you think about the IT organization today, it really provides three communication services to its organization. The first is employee communications. So those are communications that are used by an employee to do their job. So whether that's a PSTN phone call or a video call or anything that an employee uses to their job, or a Teams application used by a group of people. The second kind of communication is customer communications. And so that is a communication event that involves a customer on one end, probably an employee on the other end, but may involve just two customers or something like that. And then the last is this concept of application communications. And that's a communication that's driven not by a human being, but by an application. If you look at the path we're going on in the industry, I actually argued about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, at the last BC Summit, that by 2023, 2024, 40 to 45% of all business communications will be initiated by an application process. So the critical message that I was really trying to give to the CCA meeting to the group of service providers there that are the cloud communication service providers is this application convergence is going to be a critical part of business going forward. The problem is, to be an application convergence player, you have to have a platform. And the platform is this very interesting thing. There's a guy at MIT called Van Alstyne, Vanalstine, and he has written a lot about the difference between products and platforms. And his argument is products are infinitely less valuable than platforms. His definition of a platform is very specific. A lot of times people call their products platforms, but his definition is that a platform is something that other people make money by going through the platform to reach the people that want their services. So Airbnb is a platform, Lyft is a platform, Uber is a platform. These are platform companies that are creating business models for other people. By that definition, Twilio is a platform. And so the perspective that I was really trying to talk about with the CCA is, if this is really true, if 5 to 10 years from now, this industry is going to be driven by platform-based integrations with business process application, you as a service provider need to think about how you provide an application, how you provide a platform. And the problem with platforms is everybody can't have a platform, right? You can't have 500 Airbnbs, because the problem is, I've got my house, which one do I list it on of the 500? The reality in the end, it's a chicken and egg thing. It's just like why Facebook is so big. It's just like why LinkedIn is so big. In the end, friends and family, we get together and the platform becomes essentially a central point to converge. The problem is, creating a platform has two components. One is creating the technology of the platform that enables the technology of the business model, whether it's, Uber and getting a ride, or it's Airbnb and reserving a house, or it's Twitter doing an SMS message for notification you have a dentist appointment. That's really the technology side, making it so it's technically easy. The bigger challenge is developing the business side, the developers, getting developers to get it, getting that developer, when someone says, hey, can we send a message to people telling them they have an appointment tomorrow, have him think about your platform, not another platform, as the way to implement that solution and make money off of it. And that to me was the core message to the CCA is, when I look across the CCA membership, it's not a matter of evaluating anyone technically or how good you are. It's just, there cannot be 500 platforms. I mean, you can't, if every member in the CCA had its own platform, the vast majority will fail because the market will not support. The market will not support. So that was really kind of the key message was, as you move forward, think about how this is going to work. And especially because if you think about the CCA, and especially kind of the cloud communication market, it's really a market under some pretty stressed change. The major vendors, BroadSoft, who was a major vendor, got bought by Cisco, they're moving to a wholesale model. Clearly, a lot of the other large vendors like Microsoft already were in a wholesale model. So really my point, one of the key points was to the channel partners who have the SPs that have developed in the BroadSoft licensed software model. And if you look at someone like Vonage, who's developed a full portfolio, they have a platform. They bought a platform. It's part of their thing, their portfolio. My point was, before another CCA member goes down that path, think about, do you really have the scale in the market? Are you willing to make the investment so that your platform can compete in this platform space? And I think that's a critical thought process going forward, because it may be that for the CCA members, having a common platform that's used across a number of members so that development community has interoperable, movable skills may be a much better option than trying to have 30 or 40 different platforms that ultimately, when they're competing against Microsoft, because you got to think about, when Microsoft has a developer conference, how many people show up? And that's the question, is when, a small service provider with 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 end customers has their application platform, how many developers are going to come to that meeting? And so I think that was really the critical point, is as we move from serving telephony, which was kind of this standalone thing, to this much more integration with this cloud compute world and orchestration and APIs and all those things, you have to really rethink your business model, because you're not selling a product any longer. The reality is cloud telephony is to a great extent just a product. But this next coming thing is going to be a platform, because it's going to integrate with your business and define how you do things. And that integration is going to be critical. So that was really the message I was really trying to carry forward at the core to the CCA, was to think about those things, kind of think through it, and think through, if a platform is going to be critical in this industry, what is my strategy around that platform transformation? Because, by the way, if you stop and think about all the words about business transformation and how you change things, when it comes to communications, it's all about application integration.
Yep.
Right? It's not about giving people a better phone on their desk. It's about how, when the process runs out of fluid, somebody gets notified and the right people get involved and the process gets started running faster. And that is the key message that's coming, is communications is no longer a person-to-person thing. The business process, the application, and by the way, as we add, AI and machine learning into this, it's going to become much more interesting how these processes actually integrate with human beings. I mean, you literally can imagine a process with AI calling two people and saying, you two people need to make a decision in the next 5 minutes. Here are your options. Here are the facts. Please make a decision. I will record your answer, and management's moving forward. I mean, if you stop and think about it, you literally could have those kind of processes happening in the next few years. All the tools are in place.
Right.
Yep. And let me ask you this, Phil. I tell you, first off, I think this whole industry, I think, Dave, we need to take a subset of that first part of the answer, Phil, where you described telephony, you described unified communications, and CPaaS, because at the end of the day, it's funny. A lot of times in meetings, I'll have to define, set the definition, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody succinctly say it. So I think we need to evangelize that statement across the industry, just so we could save everybody 10 minutes to get on the same page.
Exactly. Well, it's a little bit like, my reaction to the phrase private cloud, which I define as the greatest oxymoron since military intelligence. Really, the reality is that the cloud is two things. And I will make this argument. I'll say that in the first stage, cloud is a business model. It's the industrial revolution of information processing technology. It's the concentration of the production of information into factories instead of having it dulled by blacksmiths all over the place. And that's really what cloud is about. It's not technology in that sense. There's a second side to cloud, though, that's really, really important in the communications business. And that is the migration from older software techniques to modern cloud-based software techniques. I think this is it's a really important thing to think about, because absent the need for innovation, cloud is just an economic model. If you're just doing the same thing you always were doing, and you move to the cloud, it's just doing it in a more effective way. And if you've ever read Timothy Chow and the 7 Clear Models of Cloud Computing, that's clearly an economic discussion of cloud. I think there's the other side, though, which is, if you look at Moore's Law and this doubling every 18 months of Moore's Law, people don't really, I don't think often internalize what that means and how inhuman it is, right? A Moore's Law growth of doubling, every 18 to 24 months basically says a 5.5 year 10x increase, 100x in 11 years, 1 million in 33 years. So you got to think about things growing 1 million times in 33 years. It's a huge growth, and it's why your phone in your pocket has more compute power than all the computers on the original Mercury spacecraft, and by the way, all the computers in the ground station at the same time. The perspective is that's what Moore's Law has given us. The thing that people don't realize is when you first build an application in a compute environment 30 years ago, the most important thing was processing cycles. They were the limitation. So you wrote your software in assembler, you made it incredibly effective. But as processors became more powerful, the software work requirement didn't grow at the same rate. We don't talk 1 million times as much today on the phone as we did 30 years ago. We don't want 1 million hours more video. We don't do anything 1 million times more. So the reality is things don't grow at the same rate. So that growth in compute versus the growth in demand creates this essentially gap of processing power.
Right.
And what we do is we use that to make the software easier. You know, it's interesting. My first professor in computer science said something that I've carried my whole life. He said, computer science is the art of balancing software and hardware. If you're building 5 of something, you buy all the hardware you can to make the software development cheap. If you're building 1 million of something, you optimize the software as much as you can to make the hardware cheap. He says those are easy. What do you optimize when you're building 1,500 of something? And that was the interesting. And so if you stop and think about what we're doing today in IT, it's still about optimizing those characteristics in the system. And so, you know, if you look at what's happening, we're actually changing the way we build things in where things run and where they operate. So if you look at cloud, I mean, cloud really is this next generation of where things operate, and the software that runs in the cloud is now being developed with such incredible inefficiencies in how it runs that it makes it really easy to develop. It's why we can have microservices. I mean, if you think about it, the old CS1K software from Nortel, I mean, it was basically millions of lines of software that had been written over the years. And when you changed one line of software, it might impact the whole rest of the thing. So you had to do regression testing on the whole product. Now we have these little modules of software you can test. That's why you can release new versions of software literally every day in the cloud. And so the movement from that old software model to this new software model, and the combination with all the tools you have in the cloud, is enabling incredible innovation. I mean, it's why you saw both at the Zoom conference, for example, they were talking about having, you know, in-meeting translation. The reason you can do that is that the ML for translation is available in the cloud, and you can implement it very easily in the cloud. To do the same thing in the old software would be hugely challenging. Plus, you know, the IP flows, etc. So I think the thing that we really need to think about is that the new technologies in the cloud are creating new innovations. And those new innovations are going to be less and less about how we communicate in an event like this, and more about how this event gets tied into the rest of the business processes. I think that's the real critical change we're coming to in the next 5 to 10 years, is communication is no longer a standalone. It's much more an integrated part of the overall business process.
On the platform piece, we talked about business process, and I agree with you, by the way, that you have to have a small number of platforms to be relevant. And do you agree? You know, one of the areas is, I heard you say very strongly, business process is key. And I think, you know, to me, I love platforms that either have a very dynamic way for you to build and architect business process to match and map what your reality is, or they are specific to a vertical and have business processes that are mapped. And the other part is the relevancy of the ecosystem. And it's also, you know, it's the supplier and consumer side, because it's like what makes TripAdvisor, Airbnb, Uber is it's the classic supply demand intersection of the curve, and you've got to have the supply and the demand for it to be relevant. What are the other, you know, how important are the two that I just mentioned, the business process, the relevancy of the ecosystem on the buy and the sell side?
So absolutely. I mean, those are, I think the two key things are, you know, how do you address business processes, right?
Yep.
So the challenge with addressing business process, I would argue there are kind of two dimensions that. There's one that is addressing business processes that are instantiated in things that people buy. So if you're buying a product like, you know, if I'm a dentist and I buy a dentist office management product that, you know, manages all my appointments, manages my billing, does that, it's my software for my office. One option is to integrate communications into those packages. For example, that's what a company called Weave does. They're out of the Salt Lake area, and they do that for dentists and a few others. And they're really about these kind of, how do you integrate a specific set of communication activities into a defined business process software package? We're seeing a lot of that right now happening, for example, in healthcare with CERN and some of the other guys in healthcare. We're seeing a lot of it, by the way, happening also in finance. Though in finance, there's not quite the same number of, I'll call them packaged software vendors in the finance market, but we're seeing kind of the same level things. So that's kind of the first way things can get adopted. The second way things can get adopted is the way almost all of the Twilio adoption has been done today, which is by the developer community. So basically,
Right.
Somebody comes in and says, hey, 30% of the people aren't making their appointments. We'd like to do a notification. Can we send them a message? Bob says, oh, I know how to do that. He goes and writes some code and actually writes code and integrates it. And it's written with code. It's written by a developer who understands software.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a third path, which is kind of the drag and drop business process builder path. If you saw, for example, Mitel with their Cloud Link at the Mitel conference, they demonstrated essentially a drag and drop business process builder where you can integrate in and you can actually tie into cloud processes. I think this really depends. On one end, you're dealing with the vendor of the software. In the middle, you're dealing with the developers. At the far end, you're making it so the business process owners can implement it in a way they understand. And I think you have to have all three of those to be effective. I think all three of those are going to be necessary to be effective in building platforms over the next 5 years. You're going to have to go, as if you want to have a platform, you're going to have to go do all three of those things to make sure you address all the potential implementation paths for communication into the application structure.
Yep. And if you're too small to be, a relevant platform, because it's a big investment, and you got to invest in the software, plus you got to attract the ecosystem.
Yep.
So if you're one of those smaller, let's say, unified communications providers, and that's not a reality for you, how does that shape your strategy? And do you focus on integrating into the platform, and where do you expand your services? Where do you put your development focus?
So I think then what your decision is probably going to be is we're going to use another platform. So for example, let's say you were a BroadSoft provider and you built a BroadSoft base and you've got 50,000 seats and you're doing very well with your 50,000 seats, and you look at it and you say, well, I want to continue with my customers and they're asking me about this. In that case, clearly Cisco, through their new WebEx platform, is producing a cloud-based set of things that allow you to integrate. You can integrate those in the cloud. That communication can now be driven down into your BroadSoft deployment to do, call communication there. So basically then what you do is you're going to market to your customers with the Cisco platform. And what you're going to position is, so there's kind of two sides. You're going to let Cisco probably predominantly worry about the packaged software vendors, right? Packaged software offer for dentists, they're probably going to go directly to Cisco and talk to them about integrating with that. But what you can do is work locally to integrate not only with your customers, but with other businesses and that support business process in your area. And I think this is probably the biggest change that we need to think about as an industry. Is we have sold in this industry for the last 30 years essentially a utility. And it was a utility that everyone had to buy, because if you stop and think about it, if I have a 5,000 person company, I'm the CIO, and I walk in and I say, guys, I've decided we're not going to have any telephones in our company anymore. What's the reaction to that? What would the reaction be in any boardroom if you walked in and say, we're not going to allow any telephones in our company whatsoever? Yeah, how long would you be in business? You wouldn't be. Right. So the reality is there never was a PBX salesman who ever came in and tried to justify buying a phone system.
Yep.
It was a foregone conclusion you were going to buy one. The question was only which one you were going to buy. So it turns out we as an industry, we call ourselves box sellers. The reality is we've been selling a utility. We've never had to justify buying our product. We've only had to justify which one you're going to buy, because we all know you're going to buy one, right? You have to have it. It's kind of like food.
No, you're spot on.
So the problem is we have developed a overall business selling model in our industry, which sells basically an alternative. We don't sell the value of what we sell. Now we're getting into a time where, should I spend my money on integrating this business process with communications, or I should spend my money on a new truck? That's the business decision.
And I tell you, I saw you, Phil, do something on this topic that I think it really resonated with me in a massive way, and because I've been saying since probably my days of leading sales at a large telco, where I brought in a company that I think this was 2013, brought in a corporate executive board, changed the whole sales model to, from more of a kind of a, well, really is a solution selling type model, but we took it to a whole nother level because the buyers changed, the way they buy has changed, and the CIO, the IT organization, changed dramatically. And as I look across the industry, a lot of folks are still selling in that transactional manner.
Yep.
And it's just not resonating with buyers today. So if you have to change, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic. I saw at the CCA was one where you kind of went through the ROI model that you have and how you have to sell solutions and talk about business impact. So what are your thoughts on that front?
It's absolutely. So, it's very interesting that, and I think this has been a lot of why UC adoption never met the expectations of us as an industry. The reality is most IT organizations spend about 94% of their IT budget on pre-assigned expenditures at the beginning of the year. So when you sit down and do your budget at the beginning of the year, 94% of the budget is pre-assigned, right? Because what it is, it's all the salaries of the employees. It's all the maintenance and support for all the things you bought in the past. It's all the services you've got to buy, the bandwidth you've got to buy, the trunking you got to buy. It's all those things you've got to buy. It's all things you bought in the past you got to pay for in the future. By the way, 90% of the revenue of a company like Avaya is install-based revenue. Matches the same thing. Install-based, you spend your money on, you're not every year deciding we got $100 million to spend on all new things. 94 million goes to what you had bought in the past. If you look at that remainder, that 7% that gets spent on new starts, it's typically oversubscribed by 5 to 7 times. So for every dollar that's in there to be spent, there are 5 to 7 projects that are asking for that dollar. So the question is, how do organizations evaluate where to strategically invest their IT dollars for the future? And I think there are 2 basic ways. One is the IT department works with the business owners to define the strategic tools they need for the business. Do you need a new inventory system? Do you need a new ... Do you need a new CRM system? How are we doing that? Then what they do is they take the rest of the starts and they do an ROI analysis on them. Everything gets an ROI analysis. And so the problem is when that communication thing comes up, unless the business really asks for it, or unless it has a great ROI, it's probably not going to make the cut because only 20% of the stuff makes the cut. And so I think the message here for all of the, I will call it the communication industry in general, is I think we need to move from communications being a utility to beginning to position communication as a strategic advantage in your business process. And the key, what you see over time is the key benefit, the key value of us as a channel is being able to help you both understand how to modify your business processes using communication and how to implement it. Right. So it's the 2 sides. It was very interesting. I mean, there's a story I've told for years about, it was a Nortel story about how you can miss the opportunity by not asking the question about the business. So this was a channel partner of ours who was selling to a company that actually did ticket enforcement in Australia. So what happened was, in one of the big states in Australia, it was Queensland, they generate tickets that are taken by photo cameras. So they put photo cameras out by the road. By the way, all the photo cameras are on cars that are occupied by a person, because apparently if you put the camera out by the road by itself, it won't last more than an hour before somebody destroys it, because where do all the Australians came from? Where UK sent all its criminals. So basically a camera left alone gets destroyed. So basically what happens is they have all these tickets and they're small fines, but they basically send the tickets to this company. It mails out 3 letters to collect the tickets. They have a call center to take the payments. After the 3rd letter, they return the ticket to the police, and the police drive around stadiums booting cars, because if you have an outstanding ticket, they boot your car, because if people figure out they don't have to pay the tickets, it's Australia, nobody will pay the tickets. Again, back to that core comment. So we're sitting in this meeting, and I asked the question, I said, well, do they have an outbound call center? And the answer from both the channel partner and local person was, no, they don't need an outbound call center. People call them. They don't call people. Why would they? They don't call people. So then we went into the meeting with the customer, and they were describing their business, and the guy who ran the call center, we had the call center guy and the business owner, and I think there was somebody from the police there. And I asked the question again. I said, would you guys have an outbound call center? No, we don't need an outbound call center. I said, well, wait a second. Why do you think you don't need an outbound call center? So we don't need it at all. Customers don't call us. I said, but let's think about your business process.
Yep.
So I get that first letter that says I got a ticket, and I don't have the money to pay it. What do I do with the letter? Throw it in the garbage. I get the second letter from the police. I know what's in the letter. What do I do with it? Throw it in the garbage. I probably don't even open it. Get the third one, same thing. The third one's the one that says, if you don't pay now, your car is going to get booted. Well, what if we called that person the same time we mailed them the third letter, and we get them on the phone, we say, look, if you don't pay right now with a credit card, your ticket's going to be released to the police, and the police will boot your car the next time they see it. What percentage of the remainder do you think you could collect? Within 6 months, they doubled their number of contact seats and doubled their contract with the police to collect 50% of the remaining 5% they didn't collect by making outbound phone calls. You know, by the way, I don't think that was a brilliant analysis on my part to say, why aren't you making outbound phone calls? It was just me thinking about human nature and the process of their business a little bit, very basic thought process. That is what salespeople have to begin to do in our business. You have to understand the customer's business problems. And it's a core question. What keeps you awake at night?
Yeah. And your analysis, yep. And it's Phil, you know, I get the sense that, you know, think about it. Probably you were the one person out of 5 to 10 that would ask that question. I would say it's the why behind the why behind the why. And it's, you know, I used to drive my parents crazy because I always ask questions. I want to know why. I'm curious, right?
Absolutely.
And so salespeople, sorry, go ahead.
No, the question I think the question for all of us to ask is, can you train salespeople to do this process? Can you train them how to think about those discussions with their customers?
Right.
Or is this a set of skills that have to be pre-developed? Because if the fact of the matter is, if we really believe what we're saying is, we're moving from a utility sale, we're going to move, especially if you don't own the platform, you're going to sell the value of using the platform, which means you're now not selling the platform, you're selling the value of buying the platform with you. And yes. I think, again, you've got to think that. So the challenge we have is, my gut feel is, I believe in our sales organizations, we have 3 kinds of people. We have a percentage of people who already know how to do this. There are people in our organization that know how to do this and do it every day. There are a set of people that have the right sales skills, and if we train them on how to think, how to do a little bit of analysis, how to, you know, understand a P&L, understand how profit gets impacted by cost, understand some of those things, they can basically gain the skills they need to have those conversations. And I think there's a third group that probably will never make that journey. And I think the challenge for over the next 5 years for a lot of service providers is to understand if my value proposition to my customers is going to be not, I'm selling you a utility and it's the cheapest, best utility, but I can help you transform your business, and your relationship with me is more than just buying, you know, butter. It's understanding how to do that and how you're going to migrate your sales force to do that is going to be critical. Because you can have the greatest solutions and the greatest thoughts. If your salespeople can't intellectualize it and sell it, it's going to be a problem. And I think that's becoming more and more of a challenge in our industry, because I think we do have a lot of salespeople that basically are really good at selling things where they don't have to sell the value of the thing per se. It's just the competition versus other pieces that are the same.
Yeah. And how important is it for the buyer now? And in light of the increasing complexities, the new technology moving at warp speed, the digital transformation programs that are now very strategic to the business, no longer like a utility or plumbing, you know, it just has to work. It's now very strategic and it has business implications. So for the buyer that's talking to different suppliers, how important is it for the buyer, do you think, to make sure they're dealing with somebody who knows how to ask the right questions, somebody who is going to be able to get business process engineering and get, you know, solving problems and understands financials well enough to build an ROI? And how do you find that right salesperson to act as your, you know, advisor?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really important point. And of course, one of the things is this is non-uniform based on scale and size, right? So you got a very large corporation. They probably have people that understand and have the time to invest to understand the process and the places very effectively. I think as you get down into the mid market, and by the way, I will make the argument still, if you look at cloud, it's still a mid market migration.
Yeah.
I think there for the buyer, understanding the value proposition here, right? And it really is, I think there is a fundamental choice for a buyer now. The buyer's choice is, I can buy very basic communication products that will be very good for my users, and basically go focus somewhere else, right? So depending upon what your business is, that may be the right decision. On the other hand, if your business is more of a process business, and I think this may, depend a little bit kind of business it is, that's where you may find that really looking at how do I improve the process, and here's the interesting thought, just at an IT level generally, make the argument that if you look at information alone, not including communication interaction, just information alone, I will make the argument that we have optimized a lot of our business processes to the point where there's probably not a lot of optimization left. In other words, if you look at business process software, I mean, the first wave was probably, before the 90s, it was all proprietary and done by big corporations. Right? GM had great process software when I was there in the 80s, but it was all written by GM and IBM together, and it was very proprietary. The 90s saw the explosion of suite software packages like SAP and Oracle, but they were all highly customized to reflect the business process of the large companies that were implementing them. As those processes became implemented into products like SAP and Oracle, those packages began to reflect the business processes of those companies that had implemented it. So over time, that business process software actually began to represent the best practices of different industries. So what happened starting in 2000 was the next set of adopters didn't customize. They changed their business processes to match the software. So we're now in this situation where businesses, I mean, if you look at those ads in the TV, it's a very interesting perspective, right? Walk past that ad and said, 100 companies in this industry run SAP. There's no strategic advantage for any of those businesses in SAP if they're all running it. And it's all the same.
Right.
IT has lost strategic advantage because we're all running the same thing. And we've come to the end of the innovation cycle in information alone. We have AI and ML is going to change that. But the information itself, integrating human interaction, communication, notification, and response into the business process is the next place of fundamental innovation. And that's really the transformation that we want to be part of. And what's really interesting is, I mean, if you look at Twilio, you can make a very interesting argument about Twilio, and you can say Twilio was an outsider who came in and changed the industry. At Nortel, we had ACE, our application communications environment, which was API integration with web services applications, was running in 2008. Did all these great integrations. Now, SMS wasn't there. That clearly, because SMS was not as big in 2008. Right. But the perspective was, the concept was there. The problem was that the guys who owned the PBX and the guys who owned the software applications couldn't talk to each other, and there was no translator in between. So the guys who owned the PBX came and said, we got this great web services application, and they couldn't explain it to the IT guys, and the IT guys couldn't figure out how to use it, and so nothing happened. What Twilio did was they realized you don't have to sell to the telecom people. You can sell directly to the application developer and the business developer. And that was the disruption of Twilio, was not the technology. It was the sales model process of not trying to integrate it with the PBX, making it independent, and realizing that a lot of that didn't involve employees initially. So I think that's, the really interesting question is, if you look forward, you can anticipate a world where people are intimately integrated in real time into business processes with artificial intelligence, with other people through the course of their day as a natural way of working. The question is that going to be done with or without the telecom industry? Because whether you want to argue with Twilio as a telecom company today or not, you can definitely argue that when they started back in 2010, 2011, they didn't start being a telecom company that decided to do what they did next. They started as a new entrant who had no position in the market and did that first. And so the point is that what's going to happen? Because there's a level of innovation, adoption, and transformation coming. And the question really is, will this industry lead that integration, that convergence of communication and IT? Will those come together where the people on this side and the communication side are involved? Or will it happen just like it happened with Twilio, where people over here weren't involved? It's a new player over here done by these industries on this side. So, I think that's the big question. We have to actively become involved in this process, or we're going to continue to be the utility off at the side, and there will be other ways they'll do communication and applications.
So you said earlier that you thought Twilio would be qualified as a platform.
Yes.
So today we're using Zoom. Would
Yes.
you say that Zoom is a platform?
Zoom, as we're using it today, is a product.
Okay.
Zoom is rapidly trying to be a platform. They have about 110, 120 applications in their app store. They have some things that have been done. I would argue they have not yet become a platform, but they are trying to become a platform. Very interesting that if you look at all 3 or 4 of the major, 4 or 5 of the major cloud players, and if you look at them kind of by scale, right? So if you start with, Ring Central, they definitely have a platform play. Mitel with CloudLink, they have a platform play. Clearly, Cisco has a platform play. Microsoft has a platform play. Vonage has a platform play. So, there are essentially a fairly large number of players that have defined that they want to have a platform play. Now, clearly, very few of those have achieved the level of being a successful platform, right? So the question you've got to ask is, how many people are actually developing and selling products based on Mitel CloudLink? And at this point, it's not very many. In fact, I just wrote an article on No Jitter, and I said that was actually one of the big challenges for Mitel is you have a CloudLink thing that works now and you can demonstrate it. The next problem is, how do you get people to start building to it and adopting it and using it? And that's the next big challenge.
Right.
So yeah, I think, there are essentially a lot of players are offering a co-joined platform that includes, employee collaboration, customer collaboration, and application collaboration.
Well, isn't it interesting that Avaya has joined in with Ring, and that itself, where's the platform there? Which one of those are the platforms?
Ring is the platform. So the Avaya thing actually is very interesting, and I actually am just finishing editing an article with Beth that'll go up next week on Avaya. Actually, it's a couple of articles, and my view on the Avaya deal is actually very interesting, and I'll let people read the article to get the details. But if you look at the 4 key strategic challenges that Avaya faced prior to the Ring deal, they are all at least to some significant, if not completely, resolved by the Avaya deal. So if you think about Avaya's 4 core strategic challenges, they had a UCaaS challenge in the large enterprise. They had a UCaaS challenge. They didn't have a UCaaS product, so there's a challenge. Large enterprise, SMB, and mid-market. They don't have a CCaaS platform, and they got a whole bunch of stockholders who actually were bondholders who got stock because of the bankruptcy and really don't want stock, really want cash because they really like bonds, they don't like stocks. So because they were bondholders. And if those of you who don't understand the investment community, they are 2 different groups in most organizations. If you think about the deal they did with Ring, what they did was they basically abandoned all hope of ever having a UCaaS platform, which is made by Avaya. That's what they did. What they did is they sold the install base to Ring 1 seat at a time. That's literally what they did. Now, if you think about it, it's actually a pretty good deal. They solved the large enterprise problem where 60% of their customers have already committed to Microsoft Skype, Skype for Business and Teams.
Right.
They're not going to sell a lot there. So basically, it makes it easy. They can walk in and say, look, guys, we're not trying to sell you a UCaaS platform. If you want to use Teams, go use it. Great. They and their channels in the large enterprise space can focus on what's really, really important. What's the only important thing in the large enterprise space for Avaya? Migrating people to a cloud business model, getting more people to do the Bosch deal. 5 years at $6 a port for 150,000 seats. Give me that deal. I'll make money all day. That's a great deal for Avaya. That's where they don't come in and try to convince you that they got a crappy UC product that you should buy. Just say, go buy Microsoft. But you still want to have a PBX because you don't want to put Microsoft telephony in. It's too expensive, not reliable, et cetera. Keep your PBX for 5 years. By the way, if you're keeping your PBX for 5 years, why don't you move to a contract offer and not manage? You don't want to waste your time on it. Pay me that $6. If Avaya can transition 10 or 15% of that install base, which they're currently getting $1.50 a month to a $15, $20 a month cloud contract, it's a great deal. I mean, if you stop and think about it. So great deal there. The SMB business, there was no way they were going to win in the UCaaS business. They were too far behind. There's not anybody to buy that they can afford. I mean, everybody who's in the business who's big enough to be interesting to buy has a market cap that's greater than Avaya's. So you can't buy any of them. Trying to build it yourself was a fool's journey. The MCS was there. It got killed. There has been attempts in the past. I think selling that off was great. They got rid of that, got out of that business as well, let their channels focus on the migration to Ring. What it lets them do is focus all of their future research into the contact center, customer experience space. Really focus, because that's where Avaya has to win as a company going forward, not trying to win in UCaaS. And then what it did, interestingly, it gave them $500 million because they got $500 million in stock, 125 as investment, 375 as cash for the deal. That let them take $500 million of the cash they had and buy back stock. And because they have a $1.3 billion market cap, that's like buying back 40% of the available stock, which is a great deal for those shareholders who want to get out of a stock position and get back to cash. So if you look at the deal from an Avaya perspective, I think it's a great deal. It gives Avaya a chance to focus in a space where they have the opportunity to become a long-term leader in the industry. So I think it's actually was a good deal for Avaya. I actually have an incredible amount of respect for the team that put it together.
So you see a place for Avaya going forward?
Again, the place for Avaya, there's, if you look at the business and actually in the analysis side, there's two articles I wrote for NoJitter. The second one is much more of a financial analysis of the deal. And actually, I compared the deal to selling the whole IP office business to Mitel for $500 million, and which is a better financial deal for Avaya. Turns out this is a much better deal because you get to keep all of the margins from the premise UC business and the revenues, which if you look at it over the next 10 years, probably is, billions of dollars, $10 billion of revenue that will stay with Avaya. On the UC side, they don't have to invest in UCaaS, and they can focus 100% on customer experience, contact center, that transformation to become a major player. And by the way, over time, that's where I think there's going to be a lot more money. Because again, if you think about customer experience and application communication, I would argue they're much more co-joined than with the employee communication side. I mean, application communication is where it involves a customer. Application instantiated communication where it involves a customer is much more important. So imagine you're sitting there working on some application on your machine, and you're struggling a little bit, that the ML on the machine figures out you have a problem, and a window pops up and says, you look like you're having a problem. Would you like to talk to Bob about your problem?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's actually, we're actually initiating the event, not from you deciding I want to talk to someone, but by presenting you the option of talking to someone because it looks like you're having a problem. Because we've kind of ascertained that you tried to do this 3 times and it didn't work. Well, maybe you don't know what you're doing. Maybe I should offer to help you. And again, that idea of delighting customers, right? If you know I'm having a problem and you offer to help me before I ask for help, is that going to make me feel good about you as someone who supplies to me?
Now, granted, I've not talked to the executives at Avaya. My initial reaction was bad deal for Avaya, bad deal for Avaya. Actually, okay deal for Avaya, bad deal for Avaya VARs, great deal, grand slam home run for RingCentral. But if you think about it the way you just framed it up, I love the thought of taking the UC, punting on that, and structuring a deal that gets you something better than what your path look forward is. But I love the idea of investing into the call center, because that is where the growth is going to happen.
Absolutely. And it's focused. So it's all about, I remember years ago, I was working for a guy and I had 4 projects I was running. It was an advanced technology group. And we had typically in big companies, you have what's called taskings. I don't know if you've worked in a big company. Taskings are when you get a budget at the beginning of the year, and everybody at the beginning of the year puts their revenue forecast together, and they're all smoking dope when they do the revenue forecast. So halfway through the year, they haven't made the revenue forecast, and you get a tasking. When the tasking says, we can't give you as much money as we thought because we didn't make as much revenue, so you're getting a tasking, which means you're not. So my tasking was like 20%. I got a 20% tasking. And I came back to my boss and I said, these are the 3 projects I want to focus on. This is the one I want to kill. Maybe it was 5. Maybe it was 4 out of 5. And he said, no, Phil. He says, you don't understand. I'm not asking you to kill anything. I just want you to keep doing everything with less money. and by the way, you laughed at that because when I say it that way, it sounds pretty stupid. And basically, after I pointed out to him, I said, look, I'm not going to do 5 things and fail at all of them. I'm going to pick the one that I think is least important and not focus at all on it, and focus the resources I have on accomplishing 4 things and making them really good. Amen. And to me, that's really what Avaya did. What they did was they didn't just talk about what are our assets. They talked about what do we need to focus on? How do we get rid of focusing on stuff that we don't need to focus on to strategically win? And that we really have a low probability of winning it. And the reality is, I think at some point when they looked around the room with the advisors and the management team, they said, you know, we're not going to, it doesn't matter what we do, we probably can't win in UCaaS. It's a bad, risky bet. And so they walked away from it. For RingCentral, it's a really interesting deal. So here's an interesting thought process. Avaya is best served. So the product is called ACO. It's basically RingCentral reconfigured as Avaya Cloud Office, clearly focused on the IP Office space because it's Avaya IP Office, Avaya Cloud Office. And it is sold, as I understand it, will be sold by RingCentral. The contract paper will be RingCentral. Avaya will receive commissions, call them a super master agent, whatever term you want to use.
Exactly right.
They will commission, they will pay the channel, and the commissions will be a combination of initial contract and long-term value, and that's undefined. What's interesting is 325 million of the 500 million. So there was 375 million that was for licensing and prepaid royalties. If we assume 50 million of that was licensing, because they said the majority was prepaid revenues, assume 325 of that is prepaid royalties. So what that means for Avaya, I think, is very interesting. What it means is they got $325 million from RingCentral that they put in the bank. The first month when someone orders an ACO license, and let's say it's a $20 monthly fee because the discount's based on volume, say an average $20 fee. So the first $20 that gets paid, it gets paid to RingCentral. RingCentral, let's say it's a 25% or 25%, 30%, pick your number, commission from RingCentral to Avaya. So that means for the $20, let's say $5 will get sent over to Avaya. Let's say that Avaya takes that $5 and they send $4 of it to the channel. That means Avaya keeps $1, right? So of that first $20, Avaya gets to keep $1, but they have to send $4 to the channel, which means that for the first month, Avaya doesn't get any money from RingCentral because it's prepaid. They have to take $4 out of the bank and give it to the channel.
Correct.
So for the first $325 million of revenue, 80% of that revenue has to be paid to the channel out of the bank, which is a very interesting perspective for Avaya, which says if Avaya never sell, if never a single ACO license is ever sold, assume that all the customers never go to ACO, they go directly to RingCentral. RingCentral just gets them to go directly. Then Avaya gets to keep the $325 million. At the point at which they've had $325 million of ACO revenue, Avaya only gets to keep 63 million of the 325. So Avaya is really best served by either ACO selling virtually nothing or selling more than about 1.5 million seats. Because it turns out it's about 1.5 million seat average run after 2 years to get to a 4-year rate. This is kind of so it's a very interesting perspective on Avaya that the amount of the ACO up to a certain point is prepaid. Therefore, you're just taking money out of the bank until you start making a lot more money. From a Ring perspective, I think you'll see that Ring really works best when you get to 10 to 20% of the base moving over. They really will have, because if you look at the 375 million, that's not an investment, where they don't have an investment value. If you divide that by the $200 to $300 per customer acquisition currently, you actually can kind of figure out how many customers they have to acquire with that money to make it reasonable. So it's, I think it's interesting. It's a great hunting license for Ring.
Yes.
It's a great opportunity for them. They're sitting at 2 to 2.5 million seats. At 2.5 million seats at their conference, they said there were 350,000 customers. That's still 7 to 9 customers or seats per customer. Still very small, very SMB. You look at IP Office, it's 50 to 100 seats per customer average, huge counts. It's a real opportunity for RingCentral both grow their base, but also to move upscale in terms of the size of the customers. And I think it's very important that they will get a learning about what large enterprise customers want to migrate to the cloud that may be unique among their competitor base. Because as Avaya brings them in, assuming Avaya does bring them into large customers, those large customers will tell them what the requirements are of their migration to cloud, and that will may give RingCentral, or may give them some pretty good insight into how to build tools and features and functionality to migrate to the cloud. So,
so you mentioned that you thought that RingCentral would be motivated to bring people away from Avaya equipment and move them into their personal cloud.
I didn't say they would be motivated to. I said I'm just saying that if RingCentral did that and nobody ever bought ACO, from an Avaya perspective, they still get to keep the 325 million then.
Yeah.
So
that's good for both sides then. But
right.
The reality of it is now I can see where Pauly wants to jump on this too, because if they're going to go to Ring, then you got all that equipment that needs to change.
Right.
Because now, and it also speaks of the death of the PSTN, because without Avaya in it, they're still having to work with that whole PSTN thing. And now we've got them moving into the cloud.
Right.
This would be a big disruptor coming down the pipe.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting perspective about the disruption, and the question that's a really interesting question is, things go from one place to another. So if you think about it, everything we have from people like Avaya and Nortel started with the PSTN and went forward to where we are today.
Yeah.
The company that's really interesting is the company we're working on right now, which is Zoom. So Zoom started by building a video platform architecture that had zero to do with the PSTN. Right. It ain't SIP. It ain't PSTN. It ain't trunking. There's nothing in the Zoom product that has anything with telephony. But now they're adding a PSTN access function, but it's not clear they're thinking about it the same way as a telephony PBX would have thought. So in other words, it's a very interesting thing. If you think about my product and you say my sole focus, my product is to do telephony, you build it a certain way. If you start out and you build your product and say my product does video, and then you decide later I want to add telephony on, telephony is just an IO module at the edge. It's not the core of your platform any longer. And so it's a very interesting question. It's the interesting thing that it's actually what's happening in video today is a very interesting transformation. So video started in the boardroom. It started with conference room video. Remember the day when they had that video conference room and you could do a video to another room and you had 10 people on each end looking and waving at each other. We were all excited about how great it was. Yes. And so we started there and we pushed those out and it was all video room to video room. And those went out in the organization and then the wave drew back. People took them out. They didn't work. They were too hard to work. And they were sitting there and there's still the video rooms in the core and that market was still there. The new video market doesn't start there. It's starting out on the edge. It's starting by people doing person-to-person Zoom video conferences. The Zoom room is not the basis of the meeting. It's the thing that got it added in because two people wanted to sit in a room together. And so it really causes you to rethink. And what's really happening, this when you mentioned Pauly, it's very interesting. What's really happening is people are having to rethink this because it turns out when the room was the core of the video system, the room dominated. Now that the room is just an accessory that gets invited to some meetings when two people want to be in it, the key is having the room replicate the experience we have right now in the easiest possible way. So having a room that's really different and unique and does all sorts of cool stuff is not very good if a Zoom user who can do what we're doing today walks in and can't do a meeting easily. So it turns out the way we define systems has changed because, and so the problem is everybody who thinks in the old paradigm of room systems and rooms are really cool and everything happens in the room, they're going to have a real problem in this new world because rooms don't have a unique identity. They're just a participant in the meeting, just like you and I are on our desktop.
Sure.
In the new world.
And in many organizations now where you're sitting in an office, like the office I'm sitting in today, in Net Trio, there's a video room, but it's not uncommon if there's 4 or 5 of us that are going to be participating on a call. We're all going to be sitting at our desks doing exactly what we're doing here.
Right. Because
the experience feels more intimate that way.
Right. So actually what's interesting is, this was the interesting comment I made to Polly was that, Polly, your job is not to implement this experience. That's Zoom's job.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is to make the experience for the people in the room and the experience of the people out of the room the best possible experience. Because one of the problems with room systems is, especially in meetings that have a dynamic in the room, like a staff meeting where the 3 senior people are in the room, people who are outside the room tend to have a much less experience than people in the room. If you look at like the Dolby audio, this was the whole thing with Dolby audio, right? If I'm sitting in the room, my brain is hearing where people are talking from, and if 2 people talk at the same time, my brain can discriminate and hear what they said. If I'm on a remote location on a mono audio conference without spatial audio, I hear those mixed into a single stream and I probably can't hear what they said. So the person in the room is advantaged by hearing what the senior person said, the person outside the room couldn't hear. Another example is, this is an example of room think versus what I'm going to call group think. So this is a group meeting versus a room meeting. In a room meeting where you have 2 rooms talking to each other, this concept of having the room pick the speaker out and zoom in on the talker in the room. So have you ever been in that where, the camera automatically zooms in on the talker, pulls back on 2 talkers, zooms in. The camera's always moving to give you the person that's talking. That's great if the 3 of us are sitting in a room watching that other room. But if I'm sitting on my computer, I want to see the room. I want to see a little square around every face. I want to be able to click on the face I want to see and have that face get big, because I don't want to look at the speaker. I want to see the reaction of the boss, because the other guy that's talking is doing the competitive proposal to what I'm doing next, and he's doing his proposal. I don't want to see what he's saying because I don't like him. I want to see the boss's reaction to what he's saying. So I don't want the system to zoom in on his face and not let me see the boss's face. I want to decide, just like I can here, to see the boss's face. And so to my mind, the thing that's really going to start happening, it's going to be very interesting when you look at people like Neat, who are a new company that are coming in building room systems only as extensions of these personal video systems like Zoom. Really interesting question. Are they going to rethink what is the role of the room structure in these meetings, both before the meeting? Imagine 3 minutes before the meeting joins, the system comes on, looks at everybody, looks at people in the room, figures out based on facial recognition whether they are or not invited to the next meeting. If they're not invited to the next meeting, tells them, by the way, in 2 minutes of meeting starting in this room, you may want to figure out another location to continue your discussion. I mean, that's the kind of value you can create by your analysis and capability in the room. So I think the challenge for people like Polly is, and I thought this was very interesting, was Polly kept saying the Polly platform. And in my kind of language for them, I'm not sure it's a platform. I think they're products.
They're a product.
And that requires a rethinking. And by the way, being product companies it's not a bad thing to be. It's just a different thing to be than being a platform company where you have people doing a platform. And I think that's the challenge, like for people like Polly, is, are people going to want a separate management pane of glass for their devices and a separate management pane of glass for the system, or do they want those combined into a single pane of glass? And if they combine into a single pane of glass, who's going to own the pane of glass? It's going to be the platform who has the platform data about what's happening inside the communication of that. So I think the reality is this is beginning to define the structure of our industry. And some of the people who used to have platforms in the old world are not necessarily platform vendors in the new world. And that's an interesting transformation for them.
Well, just because they have software doesn't make them a platform. And
right.
That's where we're losing it in the English language. We probably
And the platform thing to me it's really important, because to me, that concept that Van Alstyne puts forward, which is, platforms are things that there are people on both sides of it, and somebody here has something people down here want, and they pass it through the platform. These people pass money back through the platform, and the platform gets to take a little bit of the money. And that, it's the economic model of a platform as much as it is the physical model that's really important. It's not that we have APIs. APIs doesn't make you a platform. It's how you sell those APIs, how people use those APIs, and what they're using them for, i.e. are they using them to build business models that turns you into a platform?
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, yes, it's an exciting world. I think the beauty of it is that there's lots of opportunities to create new business models and make money coming forward. And clearly, as we migrate to the cloud, there are 450 to 500 million business communication seats out there. They are all going to migrate to the cloud over the next N number of years. Now, is it 10 years or 20 years? It's probably that kind of time frame, but they will migrate to the cloud.
Yeah.
I think
I was talking to an Avaya person, for instance, and they were telling me that they have 1.5 million phones brought over to the cloud right now.
Right.
But they have 150 million out there yet to be migrated. And when this whole thing broke with the Avaya news and the fact that they're probably going to leapfrog right over to the cloud, that stands to be the biggest migration ever in history.
Yeah,
and
but remember, you got to be very careful, right? So Avaya will still sell premise systems, and unless the market begins to change even more dramatically in pricing, from a pure pricing perspective as a utility, cloud still is more expensive than a mature premise system. So I got a mature premise system, I can continue to operate it. And by the way, you talk to Mitel and you talk to Avaya that have large premise, systems, and the message you get back is, yeah, we don't want them to move, but the customers are telling us they don't want to move either. I mean, the customers don't want to do it. And I think the cloud vendors are making some changes. For example, the concept of allowing you to use your own SIP trunks with both Avaya or both Cisco and Microsoft have really adopted is the only way to be effective in larger enterprises. This, the built-in $12 a month PSTN access fee doesn't work when 50% of your phones never dial the PSTN and you're paying $12 a month for them to access the PSTN. So, I think that kind of pricing model for large enterprises will change things. But I think the first thing is a lot of enterprises are not going to leave the premise, and especially in the large enterprise, because again, they've solved the collaboration and communication problem without replacing Avaya.
Right.
Because they're using Microsoft, they're using Office 365, and it's in the bundle, so ergo it's quote unquote free. But they're going to keep a PBX on the desk for the next 10 years because they got to have one there, and that's the Avaya PBX. So from that perspective, there's a great opportunity. I think there's a huge cloud opportunity for Avaya in migrating those people to a cost-effective, just pure OpEx cloud, right? So again, back to the Bosch model. I thought that was a great model for a migration of saying, 5 years from now, you're probably going to want to go to the cloud. The world's going to have changed, but that's 5 years from now. Rather than doing an upgrade and maintaining yourself, why don't you have us do it for the next 5 years, and we'll do it for this, and it reduces your cost. And that's a great business model for Avaya for a 5-year business model. And what happens after 5 years, who knows where we're going to be then. So I think there really are two major cloud migrations for Avaya. There's the Ring Central ACO migration, and then there's this cloud pure OpEx, call it Aura CM migration to the cloud. Yeah. From the channel perspective, I actually think this is a good deal for the channels. And the reason is, if Avaya had gone and bought a UCaaS player that was some small tier player and tried to go out and offer it and it wasn't effective, I don't think it would have helped the channel sell, and it probably wouldn't have been a great offer. If Avaya had tried to build a UCaaS product on their own and tried to have their channel sell it, I don't think they would have won with that. I think being just very clear to the channels of saying, guys, we're not going to be in this business. We think this is the best option. We put together a product that will give you, for your customers that know you and like the brand, you now have a brand migration strategy. Otherwise, you've got to go figure out how to live in this new world. I think the message from everybody to the VAR channel is really, 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 really clear. You better figure out how to be an agent in 5 years.
Yeah, and I tell you, it brings another point, Phil. You know, where I'm a skeptic on this deal is that Dave, you talked about the the market opportunity that is to migrate from the prem to cloud. And Phil, I agree with your assessment. The large, where you've got concentration of users,
yep,
and low ratio of users to calls, the business model for UCaaS doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense in the hospitality space. Doesn't make sense in education a lot of times. So if you move that aside,
I think healthcare, a lot of these markets that have a lot of phones that are used by information and knowledge workers or are not assigned to an individual or locally, healthcare, education, hospitality, healthcare, transportation, distribution, retail, all of those are industries where the telephone structure will stay as it is for a long time.
Yep.
And I think you're right. You're absolutely right. The idea of maintaining a premise PBX or migrating to a cloud-based PBX infrastructure will be very viable for those businesses, for Avaya to do it for a long time. And the beauty now for the channel is it clarifies for the channel. I mean, I think the worst thing for a salesperson is have two things that they're supposed to sell and not know which one they should suggest to a customer. Right. And between us, the reason for that is really simple. If you're a customer and I walk in and I say, we have two great products. This product does this, and this product does this and this, and I don't know which one's really best for you. I think you should pick. That's the first salesman that comes in. Second salesman walks in and says, I have one product that's the best damn thing in the world for you to do everything, and I guarantee it. Which one would you buy from? Would you pick from the first one, in which case you're responsible for the outcome, and if it doesn't work, it's because you chose poorly? Or do you go with the second guy who tells you he's in bed with you guaranteed?
I want the guy who's going to be passionate about what he's got.
That's right. And
by
the way, when Cisco came out with VoIP, I remember this, Nortel and Avaya, we're choice. We're all about choice. We do VoIP. We do this. We do that. We do this. Cisco guys, the future's IP. We just do IP. Right. We don't do any of the other crap. I mean, and I think, again, for the salespeople, for the channels, I think this gives them clarity, and clarity allows them. Clarity is a beautiful thing.
I agree.
Because clarity allows you to decide and move. If you don't know what's going to happen, well, is Avaya going to have a great UCaaS product or not? Should I do this? You don't know what to do. You sit there and just vacillate. If you know Avaya ain't going to do UCaaS, it's over, then you've got to figure out what to do. So if your customer doesn't want to continue to keep the premise, doesn't want to go to an OpEx offer, if you want to be their vendor, you're either going to sell them ACO or something else, and you better go figure out how to do that. And so I think for the channels, it's not good news for the channel. Your old business model is going away. The reality is that's not the news. That was already there, and if you didn't figure that out, you just weren't listening.
Yeah.
The good news, the real good news is it's now been confirmed by Avaya. They're not going to invest in it. Now you can go make your plans for how to run your business going forward. So do you want to sell ACO? Or do you want to sell RingCentral or something else? Right. Or do you want to go to Zoom or whatever you want to sell? But right now, each one of those 3,000 channel partners that Avaya has in that space now understand that their long-term future is not going to be in a reseller model doing reseller level services. It's going to be in a cloud model where they're basically acting as an agent for the core cloud service and then selling business value around that. And that focus allows you to think about, what do you do in your business? Should you be merging with somebody else that's more on the IT services side? Should you be moving more to a general SP, or, especially on the SP side, move out of the VAR side? We talked about this for the SPs. Should you be getting into broader IT services, not just focused on, on UCaaS kind of services? So I think clarity of direction from your vendors allows you now to develop clear strategic planning. So for the channel, I would argue, it's not good news. It's not good news when the structure your business is built on is changing. But knowing clearly the path that your core vendor is going to take and what you can expect from them, to be able to plan around that, I think is a great boon. I think for the channel, they were very confused beforehand. I mean, what do you do?
And it's one of those things that I've been, I've been asking people for 3 years, hey, what's your prediction of the survivability for the traditional VAR model? And, I tell you, the prevailing number I get back in terms of survivability across that channel is, and this is asking, polling probably 30, 40 executives, 20% survive in 36 to 48 months. And so I think if you're an Avaya VAR, this is a shot across the bow. You better pay attention.
Right.
And I've also advised different VARs, I've talked to many of them, that making the transformation it's a commitment from top down. It involves teaching sales folks to change the way they sell, because a lot of the utility salespeople we talked about, that's the model in a lot of traditional VARs. And it's also changing comp. It's changing the products, how you have the conversation with the client. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on, if I'm Ring Central, I'm going in with not only my product, I'm going in as the enablement engine to help the Avaya VARs that want to change, transform. Right. And if that's how you unlock the opportunity on this deal.
And I think from a, again, from a Ring perspective, that's kind of what they get. They get this hunting license to go to the channels. I mean, the other key question is how well Avaya and Ring can create a persuasive migration strategy. Because one of the things that we have not generally heard are persuasive migration strategies. And part of that is that we really haven't had effective UCaaS offers from premise vendors. But now we have two. I mean, there actually are two vendors that have effective offers, I think, at place. Clearly, Mitel with their My Cloud Connect product, which is actually the ShoreTel cloud product. So they actually have the migration from the ShoreTel base, and they've not really come yet with the migration for the rest of the Mitel base. But in other words, the question I always ask vendors of premise equipment is, if I'm going to the cloud, what are the persuasive factors of why I should do that with you? The Avaya answer was basically, there will be tools for migration, and there may be some feature functionality and potentially device migration, i.e. reusing the phones. So, I think that's the question is, if the migration to the cloud becomes a complete rip and replace, and there's no migration value, then I think the percentage migration is going to be really low. Because then the only reason you migrate is the relationship with the partner and affinity to the brand name. So I think for all these vendors, one of the really interesting questions for the premise vendors is going to be watching how effective their migration is. And this is true for Cisco. We saw in the Spark, when they brought out the Spark, they didn't get a lot of adoption of Spark. Now that they've moved to WebEx, one of the things that's really interesting is, how do we see the migration from the existing, call manager base over to the WebEx base, and to things like WebEx calling. And again, we have not seen that migration happen to be able to understand it. When we look at what happened in the IP domain, we saw that it was just the opposite, right? So 60% of IP transitions starting in 2002 went to Cisco. Cisco was winning an inordinately high percentage of the IP transitions. So the question is, right now, if you look at the cloud transitions of people going to UCaaS, a lot of them are going to people like Ring and Zoom and those kind of places. So the question is, can the vendors change that by not only having a UCaaS product that's competitive, but also having a persuasive migration value set for their customers? And I think that's going to be a big challenge going forward, because again, the problem is, it's very simple. If I've got an IP office with TDM phones on it, I don't quite know what I'm going to migrate other than maybe some form of the database. And if it's 50 users and I can do it in 2 hours with an intern to migrate the database, I'm not sure the value of the migration tools. In other words, if the only value is a database migration, as a VAR, I look at it and say, if I could do that in 2 or 3 hours with somebody doing it in labor, there's not a lot of value in the tool to say, this is why I should choose vendor A versus vendor B.
Couldn't agree more. And if you don't figure that out, and then it's like opening up the hornet's nest, because then all of a sudden you might activate somebody to actually be motivated to make a move,
right?
But also motivated to do additional education on what else is available in the market. And if the level of effort is the same across the board, you lose your advantage. You've actually activated a buyer.
I actually put it just the opposite. I think the moment UCaaS and cloud comes into a discussion, I think it's an open RFP for everybody.
Yeah.
I think
unless you've got an advantage in an easy migration, though.
I think even if you got the advantage, you're still going to have to justify why that advantage should choose you. In other words, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Phil. I think we're on the same page.
I think the percentage of people that, a company that's got 200 people and has an Avaya IP office, if they've listened to the news and heard the Ring Central, leader, and they come in and they say, we got to do an upgrade, but we think you should go to the cloud and look at this. The probability they're gonna say after that vendor leaves, should we look at some other cloud offers? Should we call somebody else? I think the percentage that won't do that's really small. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
it's not a lay down for sure. Yeah. It's not
unless you've got affinity to the local VAR, you've got a long-standing relationship, and they're adding other things to the table. So I think it's a few things. One, it goes back to having a salesperson that's got a relationship and can have the right business discussion. Certainly got to figure out an easy path to migration. And if you're doing some other ancillary things that make sense, then I think you could take deals off the table. Yep. But if you don't have those things, then I think it's 99% of buyers are going to say, we ought to look at others.
Just look around. Just look around.
Yep.
Yeah. And again, I think going back to your point about, is this bad for the Avaya VARs? In a way, every Avaya VAR should be thinking about how they want to run this play in their install base. How do you want to talk to people? How do you want to talk about the values? How do you present it as a smooth migration? I don't know that Avaya is going to give you the playbook for this, or Ring Central will, but how do you develop the playbook to try to keep people from going to a competitor? Saying, and so again, I keep coming back to it. Now you know where the target goal is. You know what the offer is going to be. Now you can begin to build your selling strategy around the migration of that offer.
Yeah, I have to.
The market is starving for that playbook, and by the way, I don't, I wouldn't be having the conversations I am if the market wasn't starving for it. They want the playbook, and in my opinion, that's a perfect opportunity for Ring Central. And if whoever brings the playbooks and make it easy for these guys to change is going to win a lot of market share, and that may be Ring Central, maybe others.
Well, and the other interesting comment at the Ring Central analyst event, they had a couple of their channel partners up. One of them actually I know, I've actually done some work with them and another group of partners. They actually were at the Ring Central event because they were selling Ring Central because they had lost customers to Ring Central. And so it's a very interesting so you saw a channel partner stand up and say, we lost a deal for an existing customer, and turns out it was an Avaya customer to Ring Central. And so the next time a customer started talking about cloud, instead of ignoring them, we actually made an offer based on Ring Central, and we sold them Ring Central. And so, I think I think again, for those channels that are Avaya channels now incorporating ACO right in and saying this is the migration path, that you're right, probably there are a significant percentage that will go take that migration. But there also be a percentage that once they hear cloud's the future and they look at it and say, well, now we need to it's time to look at other options. I think that will vary depending on the customer.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that it's really good for the Avaya VAR because the Avaya VAR has the relationship with the customer.
Yep.
They have a deep relationship that they've had for years with that customer. Right. So if I'm a VAR, these are my marching orders. It's, hair on fire, run like hell. Because here's your opportunity to get it now, or you're going to lose it to a channel partner that's going to take them over to Vonage.
And I think coming back to Mike's other comment, I think as a VAR, you now are going to be pushed to becoming an agent.
Yeah.
And the thing you need to open your mind up to is, once you sign up to be an agent, you can sign up to be an agent for a lot more than just a communication system.
Yeah.
And so the real question is, are you going to invest to transform your business to be a general IT services provider to your customer base?
Yeah.
And I kind of almost wonder, and it'd be a very interesting question to talk to people is, if you're not going to do that, do you optimize the value of your business by selling the install base now?
Yes.
In other words,
because it's only going to go down.
In other words, the value of the install base is only going to be optimized if you offer a broad range of services to that install base. If you're not comfortable as a business owner operating your business to do that, then over time, that value of the base will erode because it's going to get stolen by people that are doing that.
100% agree.
So therefore, if you don't want to do that, maybe the right thing to do is to sell the install base today. And I would argue that the install base is, especially like a BroadSoft install base, is kind of right at its maximum value. Maybe its maximum value right now in terms of the difficulty of getting customers, the number in that. So selling those bases, and it turns out it's really interesting because those bases are really easy to sell, right? If I'm a BroadSoft VAR, so if I'm a BroadSoft SP and you're a BroadSoft SP and you sell me your base, I can use it immediately. If I'm a VAR and a VIA VAR and you sell me your base, I can immediately start servicing it as well. So, I mean, I think there's this whole idea of how is the industry going to consolidate into this revised model of how these services are provided? And I think the reseller model, the product reseller model, is going to go away to an agent model over time.
If you're going to pivot, I think there's 3 or 4 pivot points here. One is you sell, because I agree the value is only going to go down from this point forward if you don't change. Second path is you become an agent. But if you're going to become an agent, you can't just be an agent for the product that you've historically sold because there's not enough economics.
That's
you got to
right.
extend into some other areas. The third option, I believe, Phil, love to get your take on it. What I've been evangelizing with VARs is if you're serious about continuing to be in the business and maximizing your company's value, don't be an agent for be an agent. Be an agent for other things that are not core to your business, like managed connectivity, SD-WAN, things like that.
Right.
But in the UC space, do a white label deal. Like, right. So you can still take your brand to the market and now you're making 30, 50 points margin instead of getting paid as an agent. You own the customer, you pay for the customer. But that comes again, it's back to the strategy. That's a commitment to the market. It's a strategic commitment. And you can't go at it half-assed. You have to pick one of the 3 roads.
Right.
Maybe there's a fourth.
And I think the challenge with the white label is you can white label a product. You can't white label a platform. I mean, if you stop and think about it, and I never thought about this until you just said that. So I'm thinking about it. I think you can white label products. I think it's impossible to white label a platform because the ecosystem part of the platform is not transferable through a white label.
Yeah, I think what happened, I think you're right. Here's what I think happens. I think you could take what is a platform and to the buyer, which is now a VIA VAR as an example, you're buying a platform. When you pivot and then take that to your customers, you're taking a product to the customer. And,
yeah, but the problem then is you're not delivering the platform values to your customer. So the problem is, and I just need to understand how you extend this out so that the developer who knows how to develop on product XYZ understands that now that it's branded as ABC, that it's still the same thing he used to know how to work on as XYZ. And I think that's the problem. The real problem I see with white labeling in platforms is kind of the ecosystem surround going through it and all the pieces. And, for example, where's your store? Are you committed to having a store? Is it going to be a white label store? Are you going to take the 500 applications that are certified in the store of the platform that you're getting white labeling? Are you going to re-white label that store? Are you going to re-authenticate all those applications? I mean, the problem is I don't know that a platform can ever be effectively white labeled.
It's it's one of those areas, and this is one of those areas I spent 3 years, taking one to market until we sold it. And, you're not going to do a full-fledged really super robust white label platform end to end. But here's what, if I'm going to buy a VAR, I don't think you need that all the way end to end. I think what you need is, and some do it way better than others, but the ones that can white label every element, that can empower the VAR with manage, customizable workflows, where you now are able to manage the whole quote to life cycle management. If that whole process can be handed to the Avaya VAR, and that whole process can be branded as your own, as the Avaya VAR, then I think it's highly meaningful. And, and the integration partners still look like, so if Poly is an integration partner,
right,
Zoom, others, they're probably still going to look like, I'm bringing Poly, Zoom, and others to the table through the integrations on the underlying platform. But I think there's an opportunity there in a big way. The economics, I think, play.
Yeah,
but there again, it's a commitment.
Right. And so then, the white label, so, the white label vendors also are, so right now, if you look at Cisco, they don't want to be a white label vendor.
Right.
Microsoft doesn't want to be a white label vendor. Zoom doesn't want to be a white label vendor. Ring has done a number of white label deals, of the vendors. So I guess the question really is, if you want to do a white label deal, what is the product you're going to offer? And then how are you going to deal on the platform side as the platform functionality starts to come in? But I think I think your point is exactly the right point, which is you have to figure out what the path for your organization is based on where you are, what your strategic degrees of freedom is, what your willingness to accept risk is, what you want in terms of the value. And then the other side of this is that, most of, or a significant percentage of the VARs, especially in the smaller businesses like IP Office, are more what people refer to as lifestyle businesses versus being operated as commercial structure businesses. They're not really partnerships with a bunch of people, and they're really one or two guys got together and they started a business and they're running and they're doing really well. And the question really for those folks is, do you want to make the 10-year commitment to where you have to go to come out of this as a leader? And by the way, this is in many ways not that different than the convergence that happened between voice and data, but I think it's more,
absolutely.
I think it's more disruptive. I think that was somewhat disruptive. I think this is much more disruptive. What's coming?
We're on the same page, 100%. I think this is going to be, if you're a lifestyle business, my advice is get out now, because this is not going to be for the faint of heart. There are going to be winners, losers, lots of business failures, lots of people that are coming out of nowhere and realizing 10x growth. And it's all going to go down in the next 36 months, in my humble opinion. So if you're sitting on a lifestyle business, my message to companies is, if you keep doing what you've been doing, it's going to be a slow, torturous process in all likelihood, because the market's going to change right off of underneath your feet.
Right. The market is rapidly changing. And I think, it's interesting. I just saw today, I got an email from 8x8 about a new announcement and their new $20 price. And, at the Ring Central thing, they were talking about their new $25 price.
Right.
And Dialpad has their new $15 price, or maybe it's a little bit less. And, I've argued for a long time that the cloud value of a business phone, removing PSTN access charges. So, because that's a variable, you can't answer that. My belief is the value of one business phone undiscounted is sub $10 going in the future. Mm-hmm. It's going to be, so the value of a line, a business phone used to be $18 to $20 a month on the premise system. When you added it all up over 20 years, how much did it cost per month to put that phone on the desk, not including local internal administration or PSTN access? I believe that over the next year, that will have come down to half that price, under $10, around $9. In volume, it comes down to $5. So, the interesting perspective is, if you look at the industry that way and look at the numbers, what you realize is that the volume and revenue in telephony is probably going to decrease by half is in the process of decreasing by half. I think we've come
Yes.
down a ways, but I think it's going to come down to half for those seats. The value that you're going to be able to get out of those seats for communications and collaboration is going to be some on the UC side, and some on the customer side, but a lot on that application side.
I'm
And
100% with you.
so I think if you look again at optimizing the ARPU value of an install base, and this is my second comment about Mitel, right? Which is Mitel gets $1.50 a month, $1.60 a month out of their install base. So if you take their 60 million seats, 1.3 billion in revenue, 1.1 billion from premises, divide it out, go through all, it's $1.60 a month per seat. So, the question is, the easiest thing to do is, can you get 50% more average ARPU? Can I give my install base something that they will buy that's 50% more ARPU? For a lot of people thought that was UC, this UC functionality. The problem is that Microsoft basically, by doing that in Office 365, took a lot of that away.
Mm-hmm.
The real opportunity is in this business application. And I think if you look at what Mitel's doing with CloudLink, I think they're on the right path. They're offering that easy business integration. Whether they can succeed or not
Right.
is the challenge of the ecosystem. I think the technology's gotten to that point, but as a channel partner, that's the real opportunity. Because here's the interesting perspective. People don't like to buy utilities. Because what do utilities show up on the P&L? They're just cost, right? But if I can come in and tell you something that increases your revenue, if I can come in and say, look, you have 10% churn in your business and 50% of your churn because of this thing, and we can identify that when it happens, and we can make sure an employee talks to them, and we can save 80% of your churn. If you've got 10% churn and I can save 40% of the churn, that will translate in most businesses into 20% growth.
Correct.
Because I get 5 times as many new customers for every customer I didn't have to go replace. I can go invest it outside. And so the perspective is, I can get huge uplift if I can reduce churn. So just understanding, that's again, coming back to your point about what are the questions a salesman asks? Great question to ask your customers. What's your churn?
Mm-hmm.
Vast majority of people don't have a clue what their churn is.
Right.
And then once you have churn, then you can say, well, what causes churn? And then the next question is, okay, if we know that 50% of your churn is caused by this, what could we do to solve that churn?
Amen.
And that discussion, that little path right there. So this whole thing is it's always just starting with a thread puller. How much churn do you have? That's a thread puller. Yeah. How much do you spend on this? How many contracts do you lose? What percentage of your business do you close in the last 2 days of the quarter? Well, we closed 30% of our business. What percentage do you think is lost and you didn't close? Because people couldn't talk to each other. Could we close 10% more business at the end of the quarter if we had the right tool? And by the way, I know a company that actually did UC for exactly that reason, because they could close 10% more business at the end of the quarter.
Right.
And so, I think this is the challenge. And I've actually been thinking about, is this a way where we can actually start to train people? Can we do, because I know back in the day, I remember going through a training years ago in a company where it was a management training. They put people in a training where you were the manager of a company and you had 2 products. You had the old high runner product and you had the new future product that had to replace the old product. And it was, how do you run the business to accommodate both of those and manage this challenge of, selling the old thing to make the money while selling the new thing to guarantee your future. And it was actually kind of and I think actually one of the challenges is, if you want salespeople to learn how to do this, if they're good salespeople and you think they have the capability to do it, if you want them to learn how to do it, how are you going to expect them to learn? And if you don't give them the tools to say, I'm now sitting in front of my favorite customer and I'm talking about our new application and integration platform and how it changes things. What do I say if I'm the guy who's used to selling, speeds and feeds and features, and I know SIP and all that? What do I say to say, you should really talk to us about transforming your business? And I think we have to train people on how to do that. And quite frankly, I think anyone who thinks that, well, I can replace my sales force and go out and hire people that know how to do that, doesn't understand that those people are not readily available out in the available workforce. It's hard to hire those people. And by the ones that are really good at it are probably pretty expensive.
Well, it's an interesting thing because you think about the DNA and what you have to know to have that discussion. I can go have that discussion because I've run a $1.5 billion P&L and I've been through financial training and can read every and understand every element of P&L, and just naturally curious. And I love understanding why companies exist, why their customers buy from them, why they lose, who's their competition.
Yep.
So, you know, to me, the kick-ass salespeople today are able to, they are knowledgeable enough to know how businesses work. They have a basic enough understanding of the P&L. And ultimately, what you got to do with technology, I mean, at the core, you are trying to make the connection between a business problem and opportunity, using technology to solve a problem, to achieve an outcome for the business that yields more revenue, more optimization, and whoever can make that connection using the technology and can convince the client that, hey, this is the right thing for your business, and then also help the customer sell that across business functions, which is now something that salespeople have to help the buyer do. Those are the people that I see winning, and it's got to be tough. And so I think it's a combination of, when I've helped companies recruit, or when I've done recruiting in the past, there's certain table stakes I look for in good salespeople today, and I think it's changed over the last 25 years.
Oh, absolutely.
And today, it used to be I look for people that are driven, hard work, and good attitude. Now there's a few other things to look for. But then once you make the commitment to hiring that person, you have to invest in training them, how to run a meeting, how to ask the right questions. What are the things that the buyer's looking for? And also, I think it's a lot of prep work going into these meetings, because if I'm sitting down with the CIO, you bet I'm going to be doing a lot of research on what's going on in their market, who's their competition, what's their competition doing, what are the reviews on them saying. Right.
And I think that's the point, is to have a business discussion, you have to understand the business. By the way, I will put a total plug in. So I wrote a book called Napkin Logic. If you haven't read it, it's a pretty good book. There is. The first chapter, by the way, is about 8 pages that describes P&L. And if you read it, you'll be able to pretty much understand what a P&L is and describe it. It's 48 chapters. I'll make the argument that a lot of the thought process you have are represented in books like that and things like that are go learn, so understand a little bit about how the business works, how structures work, how people understand. There's a chapter, for example, on killer churn, and it explains why churn is so pernicious, what it can mean. Once you understand that, then when you ask the question about churn, and somebody says, well, why do you ask about that? And say, well, churn is a huge deal. It can be the biggest impact on the success of a business. Because if you have a business that has relationships with customers, maintaining that relationship with the customer and having them buy the next time is a critical thing. How much does it, because the next question, then if they say, well, why is that important? Say, well, how much does it cost to acquire a new customer in your business?
Yeah.
And you got my golden in the background here. Well, I think we've all agreed on 3 things. One, the industry is fundamentally changing, and selling utility telephony solutions is a dying business. The new business is really simple. It is a much more communications integrated into information technology to deliver business value. That really is the future. It's where we're going. And I think the critical aspect is for the channels, for channel partners, whether they be VARs or service providers, they need to rethink their role in this new world. And you need to think about, am I going to be a platform provider? Am I going to move to that level? What does it take to achieve that? If I'm not going to do that, I'm going to be selling a platform. What's my relationship with that platform? And then I think very importantly, this idea of, do you offer a broader set of products than just communications? And I think that depends on the kind of organizations you're focused on. If you're in the mid-market, I think expansion. If you're focused on very large enterprises, you may be able to stay focused more on communication and focus on the business platform integration. But I think I would say the most important message of all of this, and Mike, you said the same thing. If you don't start planning for this today, if you're a VAR or service provider in the business, in the industry today, if you do not have an active plan and strategy for how this transformation is going to be implemented within your business, how you are going to react to it, what you're going to do, where you're going to go. If that's not a strategy you have in place where you have a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve, as they say, if you don't have a plan, you're going to get your destination. You just don't know where it is. And I can tell you the destination you're going to get to, if you don't have a plan, probably is not going to be as comfortable as you'd like. I tend to write for both No Jitter and BCStrategies and WebRTC World occasionally, though quite frankly, WebRTC is no longer a hot topic because it won. The beauty of WebRTC is it started in 2012. And I said in 2012 that by in 5 years, the world will have changed, that WebRTC would change the world. Everybody kind of laughed at me. Here we are 5 years later, and as far as I can tell, nothing is being developed today that's not based on WebRTC and real-time communications. I mean,
including what we're talking over right now.
Right. The fact, exactly what we talked, it uses WebRTC components and it's based on it. WebRTC 1, the thing that hasn't happened is the browser becoming kind of this universal thing, but I think that's beginning to happen. And of course, the real change is that applications have become so much more engaged into our lives. But all the applications, the real-time communication, all these applications you see is all WebRTC based. The real-time IP web for communications, I think, has won. And now the question is really, how do we integrate that with the rest of the IT infrastructure? And I think there are coming things that are going to kind of amaze all of us. I think we will be amazed.
What about VoLTE? Where are we with that? And how's that going to disrupt traditional?
So, here's the really, really interesting question about all this. VoLTE is an attempt to do real-time communications on an IP infrastructure the hard way. The reality is there's an easy way, but the easy way doesn't happen until real-time becomes an insignificant part of the traffic on the network, because then you just give it priority, because the rest of the traffic never notices that there's something moving with priority. It's like, why do we not have reservation systems on LANs? Because if you're running a gigabit Ethernet connection to the desktop into a switch that's running 100 gigabits, the 64 kilobits per second of a voice call kind of doesn't matter that it's getting priority through the network. And so if you look at VoLTE, and by the way, I'm not disparaging VoLTE at all. I'm saying the challenge with VoLTE is VoLTE was designed to allocate the bandwidth to real time at a point in time it couldn't be done statistically. But the reality is 5G, there's so much bandwidth in 5G, it's just like the LAN. Real time is insignificant. It's just a small percentage, right? Because the reality is we're not building 5G to make phone calls. Verizon isn't there saying we need 5G because we can't handle the demand of the number of phone calls people are making. We need 5G for more phone calls. There are not going to be more phone calls. What happens if 5G is 10x more capacity on the network? That means real time is 1/10 of the total capacity of the network, what it was before. I mean, the interesting thing, I always tell this story. In 2001, I was at Nortel headquarters, and we had we'd done the initial implementation of the SONET-based Ethernet infrastructure to run IP over the SONET infrastructure. And there were 3 or 4 SONET switches that were running in a test lab setup, running data paths through them. And one of the engineers made the comment, he said, we're running more traffic through there than all the phone calls in the world combined.
Right.
Through 4 switches in a room. And you kind of stop and think about that. What you realize is real time, once the network gets to do all this other stuff, as long as you give the real time priority, it's okay. My argument to the FCC always was, I think net neutrality, the problem with net neutrality is we're looking at it too simplistically. We're looking at it from 2 sides. Either you have it or you don't. What I'm asking is, why can't we be a little net neutral? Why don't we take 10% of our traffic and say 10% of all traffic on all networks can be marked as high priority traffic and will absolutely get transmitted with absolute priority and never discarded or never delayed by other traffic. And you as a inputter of data into the network, as a buyer, I buy a chat. If I get 10 megabits input bandwidth, I get to mark 1 megabit of traffic as priority. my
Yep.
real-time traffic. And at every peering point, the same thing happens. So we now have this 10% of traffic that moves through the network at the root performance of the network, and the other 90% just lives on top of that.
Right.
If you do that, now we can have great real-time applications. It's really easy to implement. And by the way, we can have great innovation, because think about Netflix. They are the largest inputter of data to the internet, largest single inputter of data volume to the internet. Do they do any real-time? They don't do any real-time, do they? So they couldn't use this real-time priority thing because they don't do real-time. But wait, what if when you hit that movie start on Netflix, they sent the first 100 packets of the movie to you with priority? And then they switched out of priority when they started doing the stream, and they'd filled the buffer. What if we used priority transmission to fill the buffer to accelerate the playing of the movie? And we actually used it to manage the buffer. If the buffer got to a certain level low, you'd send a few priority packets to fill it up. You can actually create great innovation by transformation. And my argument is the problem with net neutrality is it's a binary. We shouldn't have a binary. We should have something, we should be totally net neutral in 90%, but we should let users decide about 10% that's not really net neutral. And then the innovation from that, I think, would be transformational. But we don't tend to think about things, how you solve things kind of in some logical ways like that.
Well, Phil, it has been an incredible discussion with you today.
Cool.
We really appreciate you carving out the time. And for those that are just hearing Phil for the first time and they want to learn more, Phil, obviously read your book. Where else can people follow you?
Best way to contact me is just P. Edholm at PKE Consulting. You can go to PKE. My middle initial is K for Carl. PKEconsulting.com. Feel free to send me an email there. My role primarily today is working with companies and understanding their business, marketing, and marketplace strategies. So very much. And as I said, if you go to Amazon or just type in Google napkin logic, like a napkin that you'd write a diagram on, you're sitting in the bar with somebody and they ask a problem and you write a diagram on it. 5 stars on Amazon. It's actually something I'm really proud of, and everybody who's read it says they get a lot of good ideas out of it. Thanks, guys. I will wish you a good day and have a great rest of the day.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks you too, Phil.
Yeah, thanks again for being part of it.